Today I'm here to talk about history, and I'm here to talk in particular about family history, your own family history. World history has always been an interest of mine. It's what brings everyone together. It gives us a feeling of our place in the world. It lets us understand trade. It lets us understand wars. Why are refugees moving around? Why are people moving around? Our country's history is very confusing at the moment. And we do not actually spend a lot of time anymore in schools really studying our country's history. It's been confused. But our history in this country is phenomenal. It has brought people from such diverse cultures together and has created an incredible melting pot. It's created an incredible Malaysia, whether we think so at this present time or not. Family histories are something we very, very often do not talk about anymore, and we do not ask enough questions of our parents, of our grandparents. And the disconnect between grandparents and grandchildren is great these days. And I see it with my own children and my parents. My children actually know very little about their grandparents, what my parents did in order to give me the life I have, and then in turn how I grew up and why I do the things I do today. As I grew up and as a young adult, I always asked people, where are you from? It would be the question that started the whole conversation. The taxi drivers, the guy next to the plane, in front, at the seat next to me, on the bus on a long journey. Where are you from? You'd always start a conversation this way. And, more often than not, you'd find there was a connect somewhere. You had things in common. And if you didn't have things in common, you would learn things about each other. My father died in 2013. I realized I hadn't asked him enough questions. I knew a lot about his history because he wrote things down. But there were things that I knew nothing about, and it really frustrates me today not to know those special things about his family, what they did, all those kind of things. And I really think I've lost a huge amount not knowing that. I had tried to get him to write it down. And he started to just before he died, but it wasn't enough. I left it to him. I kept pushing him, saying, Dad, write this down, write this down. But in the end, there wasn't enough time. So I've got to rely now on my own memories of the stories he told me and in order to put them down. When my dad died, I eventually sort of got it together, and I now ask my mother all sorts of questions, because I know very little about my mother's past. But as I've been putting all this together, and it's my next project, I'm actually working on it now and trying to get all these stories down so that there's a record for my children and possibly their children, so that they understand where I've come from. I found that these little bits of history, these stories, connect not just me to my family, but they can possibly connect me to somebody completely different from me, somebody from a different race, somebody from a different religion, somebody from a different background. Those gems that I've found in my own family history connect me to a complete stranger sometimes, and there's things in common. I also truly believe that there is a genetic memory that flows through all these things. Why am I good at certain things? Why am I good at art? Why can I draw? How come I'm good at planting things? Why do I like to travel? There's all sorts of things that I like and things that I can do that I can't actually explain. How come I know how to do that? So I believe that there is a genetic memory that runs through each of us, and we carry that genetic memory forward to our own children. So in some ways, we have to try and figure out and try, well, not control, but it would be really cool to be able to activate the good bits of our genetic memory and let that carry forward. My parents, both sides, came from agricultural backgrounds, and that's why I'm interested in plants and planting. My father wrote diaries obsessively. He drew, he sketched, he made us do that. My mother was an incredible cook and a homemaker. She made all our clothes. She embroidered, she smocked. They were both incredibly creative. And I think I've inherited that from them, a way of that genetic memory coming through them to me. And I know that my grandfather, on my father's side, was incredibly talented at drawing. He used to draw me little pictures when I was tiny, and I remember them. I don't have any of them now, but I remember them. And I think it's really important now, at the stage we are in our country now, to talk to each other and to learn our various sort of collective pasts and our memories. Because some of you here today may think that you have absolutely nothing in common with me. A lot of people think I have nothing in common. I am not connected at all to Malaysia. A lot of people tell me to my face, you're an outsider. You have nothing to do with Penang. You know, how can you be Malaysian? I get asked that and told that all the time. But I believe that if we can find those little histories, our past, you know, sort of histories with our families, we actually have the confidence to say, I am part of this. I am a Malaysian, my parents came from there, my grandparents came from there, like yours, and with that you start a conversation. I'm trying to write everything down now, and it's just amazing what I'm finding, you know, all the information of where my families were, how they grew up, what they did, the nightmare that a family can be sometimes. Intrigue, poverty, hardships, evil, good, wealth, mystery, murder. I mean, you name it, you'll find it, but you need to ask. And when you do that, you find the most incredible surprises, and you also find that you relate to other people because of those incidences in your past. I would like to share with you a little bit of what I found out about my family, and I think you, at the end of it, well, I hope at the end of it, many of you will relate to me a little bit more, and I'll be able to relate to you, and we'll be able to start all sorts of conversations. So I'm just going to start now with some of the things that I've found out. And I really hope that all of you can go home and spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Go home, ask your parents, where were you from? What did you do? What did my granddad do? What did my grandma do? How did you live? These are little things that are so, so interesting. This is my mother's family. This picture was taken in Segamat in a studio in Johor. And let me get the pointer going. That's my grandfather, and this is my grandmother. Step-great-grandmother and grandfather, his grandfather. This is my grandfather's family. Now, my mother was not born yet. She's not in the picture. My grandfather had a small holding outside Segamat, and he died when my mother was 2. After that, this family, when my mother was 6, decided to attempt to murder my grandmother. And they hung her from a beam in the house, locked in her bedroom with my mother and her sisters. They didn't succeed. They left the house, and there were other cousins in the house, little children. They broke down the door, amazingly, and then they picked my grandmother up. They pushed her, they all pushed her up, so that she managed to actually get the rope off her neck, and she survived. Now, my grandmother is a real fighter, and I take huge strength from that, because what she went through was amazing. When my mother told me this, I couldn't believe it. Then she went on to tell me that my grandfather was actually adopted, and he had originally been bought off a ship from China, so he didn't really know where he was. My mother didn't know him really, because he died when she was 2. My grandmother also was bought off a ship down in Singapore and was adopted into another family. So through time, my grandmother had forgotten actually her real name, and she doesn't actually know where she was from in China. It was all forgotten. Her life was in Segamat, in Johor. So, you know, these things are interesting. My grandmother worked in a cheroot rolling factory in Sagamat. My mother completed primary school, and that was it, and she worked for the family business. And she met my father, who was there in the middle. He came out in the army in 1954 with the British Army, and was with the Malay regiment, a Gurkha regiment, and then was with the SAS. He was in Malaysia then on a sort of a national service thing for 2 years during the emergency. Before he left, he got a job with Dunlop's Plantations Company in a rubber estate down in Johor. That's him in the air with them sort of before he jumped out for the first time in a parachute in the Air Force exercise. And he came back with Dunlop's. He went back to England for 2 months, rolled round, came back with Dunlop's as a young planter on Sagal estate in Johor. And this was when the Palong River in Johor looked like this. This was in the late 1958 through to the 1960s. And he was going up the Palong River with his best friend, and Orang Asli were all still there. And I mean, it looked like this. And they often met up with the Orang Asli on the banks of this river, and they had amazing stories to tell. And they photographed tiger tracks and all those kind of things on the Palong River then. And the estates were basically being, sort of formed out of the jungle. And this is what they all looked like at the time. And even as a kid, I remember, because we grew up on the estates, that, we were always on the edge of the jungle, in muddy tracks and everything else. And my father met my mother in the Sagama local store where my mother worked, and the store that my mother's family had a store which sold all the estate fertilizers, tools, and things like that to all the plantations in the area. So that was how they met. This is my mother just after having given birth to me. And when my mother when my parents announced they wanted to get married, there was objection on both sides, as you can imagine at the time. Her Chinese family did not want her to marry a white guy. And then Dunlop's didn't want my father to marry a local woman. So he had to leave Dunlop's. He actually quit his job and ended up working with KLK, Kuala Lumpur Kepong Taiko Plantations, based out of Ipoh. And he was with them for a very, very long time. These are my English grandparents who objected hugely at first to my mother. So we got it from both sides. And when we went back to England, we were often treated as children quite differently from my father's sister's side of the family. So it was an interesting, it's interesting when you grow up as a kid and you're feeling these prejudices, but you're not quite sure what to do with them. But you get through things. We had Malay Amas all the time on the estates, and they were always part of the family. This is my dad with me on Pry Estate. So we were based in Pry for quite a few, just a very short time actually on Pry Estate. And then from Pry, this is another picture with my father's best friend in Johor. I'm skipping. And then we went to Batu Kawan Estate. I just want to say I was born on Effingham Estate, which is in Selangor, and it is now basically where the IKEA stands, outside KL. And interestingly enough now, Batu Kawan, there's going to be an IKEA there too. And this is just me growing up with, we grew up with dogs, we grew up on the estates, we grew up with these old great cars running around. This is on Fraser Estate. And this is Sayan the gardener. This is Fraser Estate in Johor. This is Sayan the gardener who saved me from being stung to bits by a beehive that fell on my face. And my dad took the picture of us afterwards. Fraser Estate is also, was also part of KLK, and it is also now being sort of taken up by the whole Iskandar project in Johor. My brother Neil was born on Batu Kawan Estate. He was born at the Adventist Hospital here, where he nearly died, but they brought him back to life, and he's very healthy. This is down in Johor, in Fraser's Estate, where we grew up like this. no shirts, no clothes, we just kind of ran around like hooligans by the look of it. And this was our life. We had dogs, we were out in the garden, there was a blind fish owl called Ollie because my dad was a naturalist and collected lots of animals and brought them home when they were sick. And we lived in all these big plantation houses, which is why I know, this is an old plantation club, which is why I know I really like old houses now. And I like doing them up. This is my grandmother, and we called her Alma growing up, and she couldn't speak English, and we couldn't speak Chinese, so we spoke Malay to her. We conversed in Malay. Rosma, our Malay Alma, and that's her again with us. She died when I was 22. Richard, and we sort of did all these things on the estates and played around in the streams, and my mum, all of us. There were 4 of us all together. I've got 3 younger brothers, but we all grew up on the estates and my mum was pregnant there with my youngest. We went camping, we went out on our bikes for the whole day and no one knew where we were. And we often went out butterfly catching and collecting because my dad was passionate about it, and we were always seeing the orang asli in Kepong outside KL on the old Panshala Road. It was full of orang asli, but now of course it's all been taken over by development and the orang asli are disappearing, which is a real shame. That's us there, Gunung Tahan, and my dad. He was the guy that, because of his interest in natural history, he ended up setting up a scheme on all the plantations where barn owls were used as a natural rat control, and that's used now here and in Indonesia. So he set that up. And it was a brilliant thing seeing this whole project through as a kid and then growing up and then knowing as well the impact that that one small idea that he had about barn owls eating rats is now carrying through and is a norm. Now I was telling you, my father, the thing that's incredible about my father is that he really kept notebooks. These are all his drawings and some pages from his notebooks. So with my dad I've got a huge sort of history. It's all been written out, day by day. And as a kid, I never valued these notebooks. In fact, it was a chore because he would make us do them as well. And it was like, Dad, we have to do these. I mean, really. So we actually didn't think that these were of value at the time. But now that he's gone, he has notebooks written over 60 years. And he was obsessive with it. And I'm serious, there's a pile this high of notebooks that look like this. So it's an incredible record, and now the value of these things is well, there's no value. I mean, it's just huge, the value. He listed animals, he listed, things from the newspaper, photographs, incidents, all sorts of things. This was about during some incidences during the emergency on the estates, and all these cuttings. And tigers eat woman tapper, and all sorts of things like this. So we will eventually get these put into an archive where they will be used and they will be stored, and people will actually be able to go and see them because they're too valuable really to just keep at home and let them rot. So I'm putting all these things together with stories of my mother's family, and every day every day that I do it, I'm just amazed what information I find and how I have the tools to actually talk to so many people because of this history. It would be wonderful if everybody did this, but we don't anymore. We sit there on our phones and don't talk to actual people. So it would be fantastic if everybody goes back and actually just says, say to their parents tonight or something, or if your grandmother who's languishing in a bedroom somewhere. Many grandparents now you don't even talk to them. They hang out in the house and they're quiet, and you don't think there's anything there. You just don't think that you could relate to them in any way, but they've been through unbelievable hardship. They've been through prejudice, they've been through wars, and they can give you such strength and inspiration for your own life today. And everything I do is because of my family history and that genetic memory. And I'm so proud of it. And I really hope that everybody will go home and ask a question later today. And that's about all I have to say.